Kneel Before Blog presents Kneel Before Pod.
Hello and welcome to Kneel Before Pod interviews. I'm your host Craig, and recently I had the pleasure of chatting to Jim Krieg, writer of the most recent DC animated movie Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 3. We discuss writing an epic event, appropriate fan service, and making necessary changes to the source material. Hi, it's Craig from Kneel Before Blog. Great speaking to you again, Jim. We've spoken on a number of projects.
Blog. Oh, I just got it. My friend Tim Sheridan put this great joke in, I think it was one of the short, where Zod shows up and says Neil, and the Flash thinks he's introducing himself and calls him Neil. Oh, it's in Superhero Girls. And he thinks his name is Neil the entire time. He's like, where'd that Neil guy go?
Fantastic.
So anyway, Tim, so you know, I love that joke so much. I really do. It was worth this career.
So the Crisis trilogy, it's come to an end. You finally reached the end. How does that feel just to have it over?
Honestly, Craig, things were so weirdly uncertain during this transitional phase at Warner Brothers, and shows were getting yanked so that they could take the write-off. I was a little bit nervous that these would never see the light of day, that we would get most of the way through the Tomorrowverse and then it would just stop. So I am super happy that this got out there and that people get to see Crisis on Infinite Earths.
It's a hell of an achievement getting through this whole universe and building it up to this crisis point. As a writer, you wrote all three parts. What was most important to make sure was kind of consistent throughout the three films? Because obviously it's one big story, but it's also three different experiences.
It is. And when I went through Crisis, reading it again, it seemed as though the big moments are the Supergirl's death and the Flash's death. So it seemed very natural to make the first movie about the Flash and the second movie more or less about Supergirl. In this case, it's Supergirl and Psycho Pirate. And then the third movie is to pull all of those stories together, and not just those stories, but all the threads that are left loose in the earlier Tomorrowverse movies, and to hopefully give a satisfying ending to all of those.
Yeah, so it's about finding well, they're not all human, but the human stories within this massive event.
Yeah, exactly. They're not all human, but they are human stories. It's Kirk saying, of all the beings I've met, Spock was the most human, even though it's Spock.
Yeah, they were kind of raised human, most of them.
Yeah,
so
they were.
Counts.
They went to human elementary school.
Except Kara, I suppose. She's had a little trouble fitting in.
Well, yeah, that's part of her story. It's part of her tragedy, and that's what the Anti-Monitor uses against her. She's so traumatized. She's experienced such loss. That's what allows her to be manipulated. Because it isn't just an alien being filled her head and turned her evil. It was basically a trickster character kind of fooled her into making a terrible choice. And I thought that was an important distinction over just, I was taken over and then I was a puppet. To some extent, she's a puppet, but to some extent, she's a damaged person who's made a terrible choice.
Yeah, and it's interesting you put her in the role of another character in the comic book. Was it a conscious thing to condense some of it down just to remix where the characters were within the story, but still getting the gist of the purpose of that role?
Yes, because we didn't have the decades of time to spend with each of these characters, it seemed that we had to use what movies we had to get the audience to invest emotional money into the characters we had. And so to introduce Pariah and Harbinger at the last minute seemed like a mistake instead of using characters that we already care about.
Yeah, and then you can just bolt it onto their emotional stories to take on this bigger role within that bigger story as well. So it just makes sense.
Yeah, I think it helped going both ways. It made the Pariah character more integral and Harbinger as well.
Yeah. And you got a lot of fan service in there, as you would expect with a multiverse hopping thing. So what was your favorite inclusion that you got to write into the story?
The funny thing is as a writer, you put a lot of things in and you cross your fingers and think, well, maybe that'll be there. I don't know. Because things get cut for time and budget all the time. But then at each step, there's a little hint that it might actually be in there. So when I saw the trouble alert in the animatic, I thought, oh, wow, maybe the trouble alert's going to make it in. And there it is. It's there forever.
And obviously the Kevin Conroy inclusion is more poignant than you were probably expecting when you wrote it.
I wish it was not, because I would much rather have Kevin around. But I am pleased that at least there is a moment that fans get to hear him say goodbye in an emotional way as Batman. He says goodbye to you.
Yeah, instead of in that video game. It's much more
I don't know anything about it. I only read about it online.
It's much more appropriate to go back to where he started, effectively. And
he started on that rooftop.
Yeah, it was great. Is there any fan servicey things you didn't get to see that you really wanted in there?
I'd like to see Shazam's motorhome. I got Shazam's RV and into a Shazam short we did a long time ago. If it was a show, I could have done it forever. We could have done the Filmations, and it would have been nice to touch all those universes briefly. But I'm happy that we got in as much as we did.
Yeah, there was certainly a lot crammed in. It didn't feel forced in as well. I find that with a lot of fan service, that it just feels like, why is this here? It's just here so I recognise it. But it wasn't the case with the Crisis things. I felt like every element needed to be there or had a reason to be there.
Well, thank you. A lot of worlds had to be destroyed because that's what the story is about. So it was nice to have these worlds that we've been building for so many years available for that. And I don't think in any real sense they're actually gone. Some people are outraged that they think this has some sort of weight in the scheme of things. I think if you had a show that you wanted to come back, it is no more or less likely to come back having been through the Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah, we'll be talking in a few years when you're doing Infinite Crisis and then Final Crisis.
You can find me at the old folks' home. That's where I'll be in the room exactly like this.
That's what DC does, though. They tidy up continuity and then they mess it up again and they need to tidy it up and over. Mm-hmm. The cycle repeats.
Yes, it does. It does. It's like Quetzalcoatl mythology.
Yeah. So what did you learn from writing this epic event that you'll take forward into new projects?
Wow, that's a really profound question. And I think what I learned is I felt a little bit compelled to write these last three myself, and I really didn't want to because I've gotten a little bit lazy. It's so much more fun for me to sit in a room with writers and with Butch and kick around ideas and then break story on a whiteboard, and then they go away and they come back with an outline, and I say, I like this and I don't like this, and then they go away. And all of this was done somewhere else. And you get to a point where you feel like, well, maybe I don't know how to do that anymore. And the truth is you can do it. It's hard. And you have to put your butt in the chair and you have to move your fingers on the keyboard. I don't know if you know Garth Marenghi, but there's a great line where he says, the trick is getting the keys in the right order.
Cool. Well, I'm being told that we're out of time. So thanks very much for talking to me. It was great getting some insight into Crisis. And I really hope we speak again on a future thing that you do.
I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. That was my discussion with Jim Krieg. All the best to him in his future projects. If you like what you heard, then please hit subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave us a star rating and review. If you want to discuss what was discussed here or anything else, then you can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, or Blue Sky under Kneel Before Blog, or leave a comment on kneelbeforeblog.co.uk. You can also join us on Discord. For more interviews, a monthly news podcast, and deep dive analytical discussions about your favourite nerdy things, then you can continue to join us on Kneel Before Pods.